Hold up! Almost nothing you believe about the food you put in here is entirely true, and it's not your fault. We were all taught the same lies. I'm Ruli, the cart, and for 20 years I've been listening to everything they sell you on the shelf. Today I'm bringing you 40 lies from the food industry, tricky labels, colors that are pure invention, and air that you pay for, as if it were food. Subscribe right now, because after myth number 3, you're never going to look at your fridge the same way again. Let's get started. That gorgeous pinkish-orange color of salmon screams freshness and health at you, and it's one of the best painted lies in the whole fish counter. Contrary to what you think, farmed salmon, which is the overwhelming majority of what you eat, actually has grayish, pale, unappetizing flesh. The pink of wild salmon comes from eating krill and shrimp out in the ocean. Since farmed salmon eats processed feed instead, the industry adds a pigment called astaxanthin to the feed to dye the flesh. And this isn't an exaggeration. There's literally a whole color fan, a kind of paint store swatch chart, where the producer picks exactly which shade of pink they want the fish to have before selling it. You pick your salmon by color, and someone else picked that color for you. You're not buying freshness. You're buying a marketing decision with scales on it. The bottle shows you mountains, glaciers, waterfalls of pure melted snow, and a big chunk of the bottled water sold around the world comes from somewhere a lot less poetic, the tap. Two of the best-selling water brands on the planet, owned by the two soda giants, are made by taking city tap water, filtering it, and bottling it. One of those brands even had to clarify on the label that its source was a public water supply after people pressured the company into admitting it. So you're paying hundreds of times the price of what comes free from your faucet for the same water in a nicer bottle with a mountain drawn on it. It's not always worse or better, it's just the same water. You're paying for the plastic, the advertising, and the mountain of a lie. Not from concentrate sells you the image of oranges squeezed fresh that very morning. That's not quite the full story. That juice does get squeezed. Yes, but then it's pasteurized and stripped of oxygen, so it can be stored in massive tanks, sometimes for an entire year, without spoiling. The catch is that during that process, the juice loses almost all its flavor and aroma. So before bottling it, they add prepared aromatic blends, flavor packs manufactured separately, so it tastes like orange again. All of this is legal and doesn't have to appear on the label, so that juice that seems so fresh might have spent a year sitting in a tank, and its flavor might have been reconstructed in a lab. It's not a lie that it's juice. The lie is that it's freshly squeezed. What you're drinking as fresh is sometimes older than your dog. That pink and white stick in your sushi or salad, the one they call crab, never came anywhere near an actual crab. Complete lie. Kanikama, or surimi, is made from cheap white fish, usually pollock, that gets processed into a paste. That paste has starch, egg whites, flavorings, and a dye added to it to paint on that little orange stripe that mimics a crab leg. As for actual crab, if anything, there's just a flavoring meant to imitate its taste. It's like calling something made of mashed paste, shaped like a steak, meat. The word surimi, in fact, is Japanese and means something like minced fish, which is exactly what it is: ground and reshaped fish. It's not that eating it is wrong, it's affordable, and it has its place. But every time you say crab salad made with kanakama, you're eating disguised pollock. Sushi crab is the best actor at the fish counter. You read fortified with iron and picture something delicate. A fine mineral sprinkled in. The reality is a lot more hardware store than that. The iron added to a lot of breakfast cereals is elemental iron, basically powdered metallic iron, very similar to filings. It's edible, and your body can use it, don't panic, but it's so literally metal that there's a famous school experiment where you crush the cereal with water, stir that mush with a strong magnet, and little black threads stick to the magnet. That stuff sticking to the magnet is the iron in your breakfast. Yes, you can pull iron out of cereal with a magnet like it was ground up screws. And it's on purpose because iron is a mineral a lot of people are deficient in. So they add it cheap and in metallic form. You're eating real iron, the kind that attracts a magnet. Your breakfast has a little bit of good scrap metal in it. Hang on, don't leave yet, because in myth number 10, you're going to find out that something you see in every single food commercial, something you believe is real, is actually built with glue and things you'd never actually eat. Let's keep going. You buy a tub of ice cream expecting it to be pure, dense, packed with cream. And a big part of what you're paying for isn't something you can touch, can't see, and doesn't add calories because it's air. In ice cream manufacturing, the mix gets whipped and air gets pumped into it, something the industry calls overrun. In cheaper ice creams, that air can get so extreme that almost half the volume of the tub is whipped air. That's why some ice creams weigh half as much as others of the exact same size. Premium brands pump in less air, which is why they're heavier, denser, and cost more. A homemade trick to spot it is to weigh the tub in your hand. The lighter it is, the more air you're carrying home. You're paying for volume, and a good chunk of that volume is sweet-flavored wind. You order something with truffle oil and feel like you're eating a luxury. That super expensive fungus they hunt for with trained pigs and dogs. Brace yourself for the letdown. The overwhelming majority of truffle oils sold don't have a single speck of real truffle in them. Their aroma is achieved with a synthetic compound made in a lab that imitates just one of the hundreds of smells real truffle actually has. That's why every truffle oil smells exactly the same. Intense and kind of artificial, because they all come from the same test tube molecule. Plenty of famous chefs flat out hate it and call it one of the biggest scams in gourmet food. You're paying for luxury and you're getting chemical perfume. The truffle is on the label, not in the bottle. You see Kobe on a restaurant menu and pay a fortune, feeling like you're eating the most exclusive beef in the world. Almost certainly not. Real Kobe beef is a very specific variety, from a specific breed in a specific region of Japan, with extremely strict certification. For many, many years, the amount exported to most of the world was practically zero, or absurdly tiny quantities. So if the menu at your neighborhood restaurant is offering a Kobe burger at burger prices, the math simply doesn't add up. In most cases, it's a different beef, sometimes a similar style, using the name Kobe as a generic stand-in for expensive, marbled meat. Real Kobe beef actually comes with a certificate and even an identification number that follows each individual animal. If the waiter can't show you that, be suspicious. The name travels a lot further than the meat does. You're paying for the Japanese label and eating a steak with a fake passport. You pick the reddest, shiniest steak, convinced that color screams freshness. It's actually the opposite. The redness of meat doesn't depend so much on how fresh it is, but on a protein called myoglobin and how it reacts with oxygen. When meat gets exposed to air, it turns that bright cherry red. The problem is, the industry knows this trick, and sometimes packages meat in modified atmospheres. In some countries, even using carbon monoxide, which keeps that appetizing red color even when the meat isn't actually all that fresh anymore. So the color can be lying to you about the cut's real age. Go by the smell, the date, and the overall look, not just the red. A steak can be blazing red and still be older than it looks. You see the perfect burger, the milk pouring over the cereal, the shiny ice cream, and you believe that's what's actually going to show up on your plate. Only halfway true and with a lot of tricks involved. The food in commercials is built by food stylists using tricks you'd never actually eat. The milk in the cereal ad is often white glue because real cereal doesn't float and sinks to the bottom. The ice cream is usually mashed potatoes or molded fat because real ice cream melts under the filming lights. Pancakes get motor oil poured on instead of syrup so it shines better, and grill marks get painted on. All of this is done so the product looks appetizing through hours of filming. What you're looking at is a sculpture, not food. You fall in love with an inedible dish. You buy ground beef and picture one single cow turned into that little package. Get ready. In industrial plants, ground beef is produced by mixing trimmings from many different animals in the same batch. A single portion of ground beef can contain meat from dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of different cows, depending on where it comes from and how it's processed. This isn't just a fun fact, it has a real consequence. If even one of all those cows was carrying a dangerous bacteria, that bacteria can end up spread across a huge number of different packages, which is exactly why ground beef contamination outbreaks tend to be so massive and so hard to trace. It's also why you should cook it thoroughly all the way through. Your burger isn't one cow, it's an entire census. You open the packet of grated cheese, sprinkle it over your pasta, and swear it's 100% cheese. Not quite. A lot of industrial grated cheeses contain an additive called cellulose, an anti-caking agent that stops it from clumping and sticking together. In small doses, that's legal and common. The problem is, when companies overdo it. There was a huge scandal in the United States. On one hand, independent lab tests found cheeses sold as 100% Parmesan, with way more cellulose than allowed. On the other hand, one company ended up admitting in court that it was stretching its product with cheaper cheeses. That cellulose, by the way, comes from wood pulp, but in an edible, approved form. It's not raw sawdust dumped in carelessly. Still, translated into plain terms, there were people paying for premium cheese and getting disguised plant fiber instead. I'm not saying it's all fake. I'm saying grated cheese sometimes brings in everything except just cheese. What you're grating isn't always what you think it is. You order a fish by name off a menu, or you buy it at the fish counter, and you trust that it's actually that fish. Surprise. Fish name fraud is massive worldwide. Organizations that run DNA testing found that roughly a third of the fish samples they checked were mislabeled, sold under the name of a more expensive species when in reality it was a cheaper one. A prized fish can end up on your plate being something a lot more common and a lot cheaper, and a lot of the time, neither the waiter nor the fish seller even knows because the swap happened earlier, somewhere along the supply chain. It's hard to detect with the naked eye once it's cooked, headless and covered in sauce. A classic example is the famous white tuna served at some places, which a lot of the time isn't even tuna at all. You might have eaten a fish you never actually ordered 1,000 times over. You buy 2 pounds of frozen shrimp expecting 2 pounds of shrimp. Almost a lie. A lot of shrimp comes coated in a layer of ice, the famous glaze, which is meant to protect it, but which also adds weight. That glaze can easily make up between 20 and 40% of the total weight. So a good chunk of your 2 pounds can be pure ice. If that ice gets counted in the total, you're paying seafood prices for frozen water. And there's an even spicier twist. A lot of shrimp gets treated with phosphates. Salts that make the shrimp absorb and hold onto water swell up and weigh more. The result? You buy less actual shrimp than you think, and when you cook it, it shrinks because it releases all that water you already paid for. Always check the drained weight, not the total weight. That 2-pound label sometimes includes a solid glass of water disguised as ocean. You pick the orangest orange because you assume it's the ripest and sweetest. The opposite of what you think is actually true. The color of the peel has nothing to do with how ripe the fruit is on the inside. A lot of oranges turn or stay green, even when they're perfectly ripe. Especially in warm climates, where sometimes they even re-green after they were already ready to eat. That's why the industry steps in. In some countries, it's allowed to dye the peel so it looks like the orange color you're expecting, and in other places, they expose the fruit to gases to strip the green away. So you're picking based on a color that's sometimes pure makeup. A green orange can be sweeter than an orange-colored orange. The color came from the store shelf, not from the tree. You grab a tray of chicken breast and figure there's nothing in there but chicken. Depends. There's a very common practice of injecting chicken with a saltwater solution or broth to make it look juicier and conveniently weigh more. In some cases, that added liquid can end up making up somewhere between 15 and 30% of the total weight. What does that mean? That part of what you're paying for by the pound is salt water, and on top of that, you're adding a ton of sodium without even realizing it. The only way to know is to read the label and look for phrases like salt water solution or seasoned chicken. Natural chicken sometimes comes with extras nobody bothers to mention. You buy a breast and you're bringing home a salty sponge. Vanilla ice cream, the cookie, the yogurt. You assume that flavor came from those expensive black pods that grow on a tropical orchid. Almost a lie. Real vanilla is so expensive and so scarce that it's estimated around 99% of all the vanilla flavor in the world is synthetic vanillin, made in a lab. And guess where a good chunk of that vanillin comes from? Petroleum derivatives and, brace yourself, a byproduct of the paper industry, wood lignin. Yes, the flavor of your favorite dessert often started out a lot closer to a sawmill than to a tropical paradise island. On top of that, real vanilla is so expensive because every single flower on the orchid has to be pollinated by hand, one by one, and then the pods have to be cured for months afterwards. None of that happens at the vanillin factory. It's not a bad thing, it's safe and it's chemically identical. But next time you say natural vanilla flavor, think about it twice. The orchid gave it its name, chemistry gave it its taste. You picture the tomato hanging off the plant, turning red under the sun until it gets picked at its peak. The industrial reality is different. A huge number of tomatoes get picked while they're still green and hard, when they're mature but haven't developed color yet, so they can survive the trip and storage without bruising. Later, in special chambers, they get exposed to a gas, ethylene, which is the exact same substance fruits naturally release to ripen. That gas triggers the red color within days, even though the ripening of flavor isn't the same as ripening under the sun. That's why sometimes you buy beautiful red tomatoes that turn out mealy and flavorless on the inside. They turned red in a chamber, not in the field. Red on the outside doesn't always mean flavor on the inside. Don't go anywhere, because about halfway through this list, in myth number 24, I'm going to show you a red dye you eat all the time that comes from a place you won't be able to get out of your head. Let's keep going. You've heard 1,000 times that chicken is pumped full of hormones, so it grows enormous in record time, and you even buy the one labeled no hormones to avoid it. A lie from the ground up. Or in a ton of countries, including this one, using hormones in raising chickens has been flat out banned since the late 1950s. Chickens grow fast because of genetic selection, because of their feed, and because of their raising conditions, not because of injected hormones. So then why do labels say raised without hormones? Pure marketing. Because in a lot of places right next to that claim, they legally have to clarify in fine print that no bird of this type is raised with hormones. Since it's illegal for everyone across the board, they're selling you, as a special virtue, something the law already requires from absolutely everybody. Chicken doesn't have hidden hormones, it has genetics and a good sales strategy. You raise your glass, thinking that's just grapes, thyme, and nothing else, the most natural drink in the world, not the full story. Wine is allowed a ton of additions that almost nobody knows about. Sugar can be added during fermentation to raise the alcohol content, acids to correct the flavor, sulfites to preserve it, and clarifying agents that can come from a fish's swim bladder, from egg whites or from gelatin, and there's a concentrated grape dye, widely used in the industry, that gives pale wines that deep, tempting color you associate with quality. None of this has to appear in detail on the label. That's also why a wine claiming to be vegan isn't as obvious as it sounds. Because a lot of wines use those animal-derived clarifying agents to make the liquid clear. It's not poison, it's modern winemaking. But just grapes is a romantic postcard. There's more science in that glass than the cork lets you see. You buy a canned beer with a cool design, a quirky name, and a rebellious vibe, and you feel like you're supporting an underdog fighting against the big corporations. Sometimes yes, a lot of times no. A ton of brands with all the craft, woes, independent, artisanal aesthetic were actually bought out by the exact same giant beer corporations you thought you were rebelling against. The mega companies noticed the opportunity and went out and bought up craft breweries, keeping the name, the design, and the rebellious messaging while filling their own pockets. So that free-spirited beer might actually be, underneath it all, just another product from the same corporation that makes the industrial beer you used to drink before. The attitude is craft, the owner is a corporation. The rebellion sometimes comes packaged by the very system it claims to fight. You walk into the supermarket, catch that smell of freshly baked bread, and picture a baker in the back kneading dough since early morning. Not quite the full story. A huge number of supermarket bakeries don't need anything at all. They receive frozen, pre-baked dough made at a central plant miles away. And inside the store, they just finish baking it. That freshly baked bread is actually freshly thawed and finished. The dough might have spent weeks sitting in a freezer before it ever reached your supermarket. That's why supermarket bread often tastes exactly the same at every single location of a chain, because it all comes from the same factory. It's not a bad thing, it's convenient, but there's nothing artisanal about it. The oven is real. The bakery is pure decoration. It smells like morning, but it was born in a freezer. The candy, the yogurt, the gelatin with strawberry flavor. You assume a strawberry was involved at some point. A lie. Almost every single time, the vast majority of those flavors are artificial flavorings, manufactured molecules that imitate the taste of the fruit without a single gram of real fruit involved. The same thing happens with the banana flavor in a lot of candy, which is achieved with a chemical compound. And that's exactly why that banana taste doesn't resemble any real banana, but rather the idea of banana the industry invented. Check the label for the difference between flavored and made with. Strawberry flavor is usually pure laboratory work. The fruit never even found out it was being imitated. The flavor is real, the strawberry is a fairy tale. That intense red in some yogurts, juices, candies, and ice creams, you assume it's an artificial dye cooked up in a test tube. Sometimes it's worse or better, depending on how you look at it. One of the most widely used and highly valued red dyes in the industry. Carmine doesn't come from a lab, it comes from a bug. It's obtained by crushing an insect, the cochineal, which is raised on cactus plants and from which a deep red acid is extracted. It's estimated that it takes tens of thousands of these little bugs to produce just over a pound of dye. It's so common that even a worldwide coffee chain used it in their pink drink until people found out and made a huge fuss about it. It's safe and it's natural, but it's literally crushed bug. Your pink dessert might have more legs in it than you'd ever imagine. You assume there's only one thing in the salt shaker, salt, and nothing else. False. Almost always. Regular table salt usually comes with several additions. A lot of the time it has added iodine, something that was actually a fantastic public health measure to prevent thyroid problems. But to keep that iodine from degrading, they also add a pinch of sugar, dextrose, which acts as a stabilizer. And so, the salt doesn't clump up with humidity and pour smoothly out of the shaker. It also contains anti-caking agents. So in that little white powder, there's salt, yes, but also a touch of iodine, a touch of sugar and anti-moisture additives. It's not dangerous, it's useful, but it's not just salt. Even the most basic thing in your kitchen has a little recipe hiding inside it. You buy that colorful bottle labeled vitamins and electrolytes, thinking it's basically a detox juice, the healthy option in the convenience store fridge. Almost a lie. A lot of these vitamin waters are essentially water with sugar and a few added vitamins to justify the name. Some bottles have around an ounce of sugar, almost 8 teaspoons, an amount similar to a regular soda. There was a famous lawsuit against the biggest brand of this kind of drink. And in its own defense, the company actually argued that no reasonable consumer could possibly believe it was a healthy beverage. In other words, their defense was that it was obvious it wasn't healthy. And keep in mind, slapping the name of a vitamin or an electrolyte on something doesn't turn it into a sports drink. Most people drinking it aren't running a marathon. They're sitting at their desk at work adding sugar to their day. The vitamins are in there, but so is the sugar. In serious amounts. It's not water with superpowers, it's a soda dressed up as a gym membership. You assume lactose-free milk is a totally different product. Some kind of weird formula made for people with lactose intolerance. Not quite. Lactose-free milk is basically regular milk with an enzyme added. Lactase, the exact same enzyme people with intolerance are missing. That enzyme breaks lactose down into two simpler sugars that the body digests without any trouble. That's also why lactose-free milk tends to taste a little sweeter, because those resulting sugars taste sweeter on the tongue. Not because sugar was added to it. It's not a magic milk, and it's not artificial. It's completely normal milk with one extra step. Anyone can drink it with zero problems. It's not a different milk. It's the exact same milk that already had its digestion done for it in advance. You order cooked ham at the deli counter and assume that's just meat, plain and simple. Not quite. A lot of economy line cooked deli meats contain a lot more than just meat. They get injected with water. Salts called phosphates that help retain that water, starch, and other ingredients that cut costs and stretch the product further. There are entire categories where the product is largely reconstituted meat, meaning little bits pressed and glued together to form what looks like one solid piece. That's why some hams release water and shrink when you heat them up, because that water was part of what you already paid for. The difference between a quality, natural cooked ham and a cheap one is exactly in how much of that filler it contains. One trick is to look at the price and be suspicious of anything too cheap, because that price difference has to come from somewhere. And that somewhere is usually water and starch. Not everything sliced by a deli machine is just pork leg. Sometimes you're slicing meat, water, and starch into neat little slices. You open a bag of chips. It's half full of air, and you complain thinking you got blatantly scammed. Only half true. There's more than one reason behind it. It is true that a half-empty bag gives you the impression of more quantity. And that's a point in the brand's favor. But that air isn't regular air. In a lot of cases, it's nitrogen, a gas pumped in on purpose for two reasons. First, to cushion the chips so they don't arrive at the store all broken and crumbled. Second, because nitrogen displaces oxygen and keeps the chips from going rancid, extending their shelf life. So it's not just a visual trick, it's also a kind of airbag and preservative in one. Still, let's be honest, the extra air they pump in is often more than what's actually needed just to protect the chips. So there is some visual trickery involved too. You pay by weight, not by air. Always check the ounces. The bag inflates, but the nitrogen is doing real work too. You see the dark brownish bread and your brain immediately goes, this is the healthy one, the whole grain one, the one with fiber. A lie, a lot of the time. The brown color of a bread guarantees absolutely nothing. A ton of industrial breads are made with refined white flour and dyed with caramel coloring or a bit of molasses to make them look whole grain so they can charge you more for it. Words like multigrain or wheat don't mean whole grain either, because all bread flour comes from wheat anyway. The only way to actually know is to read the ingredient list and check that it says whole wheat flour or whole grain listed first. Not buried at the end in ridiculously small amounts. Color isn't a health certificate, it's makeup. A bread can be tanned and still be just as refined as the whitest bread on the shelf. You look at the label, see low calories and low sugar, and buy it feeling relaxed. The trap is hiding in one tiny word, serving. The industry chooses the serving size that shows up on the nutrition facts, and a lot of the time, they shrink it down absurdly small just to make the numbers look low. A bag of cookies you polish off in one sitting during the afternoon might claim to contain 3 servings. A small bottle of soda you chug in one go might count as 2.5 servings. So you end up multiplying without realizing it. And that just a little sugar turns into a whole lot. The trick is that the number that reassures you corresponds to a serving size almost nobody actually follows in real life. Before you trust the label, check how many servings it claims are in there. You eat 1. The label did the math as if you'd eaten 3. You read 0 trans fat on the package and breathe a sigh of relief. 0 is 0, right? And here comes the industry's most elegant trick of all. For years, regulations allowed a product with less than half a gram of trans fat per serving, less than a 50th of an ounce, to be labeled as 0. So what did some manufacturers do to get around it? They shrank the serving size on the label until the math came out under that half-gram threshold, and boom, magic 0. If you eat 4 or 5 servings in one sitting, incredibly easy to do. You end up swallowing several grams of a fat that officially doesn't even exist on the package. The trick is hiding in the fine print, where sometimes you'll spot the phrase partially hydrogenated, which is the actual source of those fats. Keep in mind that today a lot of countries, Argentina among them, have already banned or heavily restricted industrial trans fats, so the trick mostly lives on in that label rounding rather than in the fat still floating around out there. 0 on the label isn't always 0 in your body. Whoever's selling it wrote the math. You pay more for organic, convinced it's food with absolutely no pesticides, completely clean of any chemicals, the opposite of what you think. Organic farming also uses pesticides. The difference is it uses a different list. Substances considered natural in origin or approved for that system. Some of those natural products, like certain copper compounds, get applied intensively and aren't automatically harmless just because they're not synthetic. Natural isn't automatically safe, and synthetic isn't automatically poison. Organic has to do with what kinds of inputs are allowed and how the farm is managed, not with a total absence of treatments. Organic can be a great choice for a lot of other reasons, like soil health, but buying it thinking it means 0 pesticides means buying into a mistaken idea. Organic doesn't mean it never got sprayed. The list of chemicals changes, the list itself doesn't disappear. You pick the product that says no preservatives because it sounds like clean food, nothing weird keeping it fresh. Half true and pretty sneaky. A lot of products sold as preservative-free still need to be preserved somehow, so they use what the industry calls natural preservatives, and those don't get counted in the marketing pitch. Rosemary extracts, citric acid, certain cultures, or vegetable powders rich in nitrates that do exactly the same job as a classic preservative. The spiciest example is certain deli meats labeled no preservatives or no added nitrates that actually use celery powder, which is packed with natural nitrates that do the exact same job. In other words, they do have a preservative, just one with a name that sounds more innocent. No preservatives a lot of the time just means preservatives with a better sounding name. The food still gets preserved, only the name of whatever's protecting it changes. You see a non-GMO seal on a bag of salt or a bottle of water and feel like you made a more conscious, healthier purchase. An absurd lie. Salt is a mineral. It has no genes, no DNA. It isn't alive. So genetically modified salt cannot exist, period. The same goes for water. Putting non-GMO on those products is as ridiculous as selling you gluten-free screws or vegan rocks. The industry does it anyway because it knows that seal gives you a sense of a purer product and pushes you to pick that brand over an identical one. It's exploiting a trendy buzzword to sell more, a product that could never have had GMOs in the first place. bragging about not having them. It's marketing built on something that was impossible from the very start. You see Artisanal, and picture some guy in an apron kneading dough at dawn with his own hands. Lower your expectations. In most places, the word artisanal has no legal definition whatsoever. Any factory, no matter how giant and automated it is, can print artisanal on a product that came off a production line churning out thousands of units an hour. It doesn't promise hands. It doesn't promise small batches. It doesn't promise grandma's recipe. It's a marketing word, just like gourmet, premium, or original recipe. They exist to justify a higher price and to make you feel like you're buying something special. Beer can be labeled craft and still come out of a 50,000-liter tank. Artisanal isn't a trade, it's a font. The carton pictures hens strolling through a little green field under the sun. The reality tends to be a lot less idyllic. In a lot of places, labels like free range only require that hens have access to the outdoors. And that access can be a tiny little door leading to a covered concrete patio that a lot of hens never even use in their entire lives. It doesn't mean pastures, it doesn't mean full freedom, it means there was technically a door. The definition is so weak in a lot of places that almost any farm can meet it with the bare minimum, and where there's no regulation at all. Which is the case with free range in a ton of countries. The word literally guarantees nothing. There are places like the European Union with stricter rules, with maximum hen density, and even a code printed on every egg telling you exactly how it was raised. I'm not saying they're all the same. There are serious producers out there. But the picture on the carton almost never matches the actual barn. You're buying a postcard and you're getting a little door. You see natural on the front of the package, and that's it. Your brain relaxes. You feel like it's healthy from the farm. No weird chemicals. False. In most countries, the word natural on a food product has no serious legal definition. In the United States, the FDA itself admits it never established a formal rule for what can or can't be called natural. In other words, it's a word any factory can slap on an ultra-processed product loaded with corn syrup and flavorings. Without technically lying, natural doesn't tell you whether it has sugar, whether it has preservatives, or whether it went through 10 different machines before landing on the shelf. It's a decorative word, an ornament designed to make your hand reach for that package on its own. Keep in mind that even sugar is natural and salt is natural, and that doesn't make them magic or harmless. Organic or gluten-free are different. Those actually have rules behind them, but natural on its own is a total free-for-all. Relax, it doesn't mean much no matter how good it sounds. Natural isn't a certificate, it's a perfume. You buy a bottle labeled extra virgin and trust it's the noblest oil out there. With no mixing involved. If only it always worked that way. Olive oil is one of the most adulterated foods in the entire world. A famous study out of the University of California analyzed imported oils sold as extra virgin and found that around 70% of the samples didn't meet the standards for that category. In some cases, they were cut with cheaper oils or were lower quality product dressed up to look better. Italy has had massive judicial investigations into this kind of fraud, with entire mafias dedicated to the business. The phrase extra virgin is a strict category on paper, but a hard one to enforce on the shelf. Buy serious brands with a harvest date and a clear origin. Saying extra virgin doesn't always cut it. Sometimes the only thing virgin about that bottle is your trust. We've made it to the last one, and it's one you use every single day without even thinking about it. You see light or diet on a product and automatically translate that as healthy and weight loss. Not quite the full story. Legally, light doesn't mean low calorie or good for your diet. To be labeled light, a product only needs to have at least a 25% reduction in some component, which could be fat, sodium, or sugar, not necessarily calories. That's why regulations require it to clarify right next to it exactly what it's light in fat, or light in sodium, for example. A product can be light in fat, but loaded with sugar to make up for the flavor, ending up with the exact same calories as the original, or even more. And watch out, because light and diet aren't even the same thing. Diet is a whole separate category for foods modified for special needs like gluten-free or infant formulas, which a lot of the time don't even have a single calorie less. In other words, light is a comparison against another product, not a promise of health. It can be light and still be a total bomb. What matters is never the big word on the front, it's always the chart on the back. Light doesn't tell you it's healthy. It tells you it's a little less of something. And with that, we hit all 40. If this blew your mind, drop a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which one was the hardest for you to let go of, because the grocery aisle has a lot more to confess.